Right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. Um, my name is Kuhea Asiu. I'm a community relations specialist here for Maui Electric. Oh, I'm sorry, Hawaiian Electric. we changed to Hawaiian Electric in December 2019, and some of us are still getting used to that. Before we begin, I just want to go over some housekeeping things. If you need to use the restroom, it is off to my right here. Go through this door and then the door on the left, and you'll see the restrooms on the right. And in the back there, we have a lot of refreshments, and please help us partake of some and make sure you also take some home. And I want to let you know that tonight's meeting is being broadcast live on Akaku Channel 54, courtesy of our friends from Maui Community Media. And with that, I'd like to get started. So also joining me tonight is Jim Kelly. He is our Vice President of Government and Community Affairs and Corporate Communications. And we also have some other team members who are going to be joining us up front tonight to help answer questions after a brief presentation. So why are you all here tonight? Well, we want to take some time to provide an overview of Maui's current generation status, as well as some recent developments that have changed our planning assumptions. We'll have some discussion on the immediate need for firm generation that will help fill the gap created by as available resources or renewable resources like solar and wind. And as we all know, the sun is not always shining and the wind is not always blowing. We'll also provide a high-level overview of the project that our Hawaiian Electric development team will be proposing. Throughout the presentation, we'll be collecting your questions, and we'll have a Q&A portion after the presentation, and we welcome you to submit your questions. So those of you who are watching from home in your living rooms, or those of you in the room, we welcome you to send in your questions via email at, oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. The next one. Yes. Okay. So we invite you to email your questions to us at wainamaui@hawaiianelectric.com, or you can text your questions to us at 808-268-2808. Or for those of you in the room, we have comment cards. So you can put one or two questions, whatever you can fit, or feel free to take another card. And then those will be coming up to us and will be read out loud. And the comment cards are important for two reasons. One is that we want to make sure that we capture your questions and comments accurately, because they will become a part of our project application when the time comes to submit it. And also because we have viewers on Akaku, we want to make sure that they can hear your question. Next, just as an important reminder, before we begin, that Maui and the rest of our islands are on their own to generate our electricity. We do all of this without the ability to plug into another place, the nearest being California on the West Coast, and that is nearly 2,500 miles away. We also lack the ability to simply plug in to another island, so we are completely on our own 24/7, 365. So last year, Hawaiian Electric introduced our climate change action plans, which aims to reduce carbon emissions by 70% by the year 2030. And by the year 2045, we've committed to achieving net zero or net negative carbon emissions from power generation. And also by the year 2045, we've committed to replace fossil fuels with 100% renewable resources to generate electricity. These are indeed some of the most ambitious goals in the nation. And as ambitious as these goals are, we know that they are necessary and that they must include the needs of everyone. And this means the transition needs to focus on renewable solutions while maintaining reliability, planning with resiliency in mind, and keeping costs affordable for everyone. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Jim.
Great, Mayan, thanks. Great, thanks, Kuhea. So this is just a real basic slide that shows where we get our electricity in Maui. On the left, we have firm, which is available 24/7. We can turn that on, we can turm that off as needed. You'll see that right now we have about 245 megawatts of firm energy that's available. On the right is what is sometimes called variable or as available. These are resources including wind, solar farms, and private rooftop solar. We have, I believe, just about 20% of our customers on Maui do have private rooftop solar. So, we just saw together with what you see here. This is how much electricity we use on Maui. And if you look at the blue line, that was 2019 before the pandemic. And probably remember 2019 was a pretty busy year. A lot of people here, a lot of people using electricity. It was also kind of a hot year, so a lot of people using air conditioning. So you can see as we move through the year into the summer and the fall, very consistently hitting about 200 megawatts of demand on the system. Right now you can see the yellow, hard to see, but yellow is where we're at so far in 2023. Fairly, about 180 megawatts. So we haven't hit the peaks that we saw in 2019, but that can change very quickly. So one of the reasons we wanted to get everyone together was to talk about some of the actions that we're going to be needing to take as a community and as a utility over the rest of the decade. We have 4 units at our Maui power plant that are going to face likely retirement because of the difficulty of getting parts to overhaul them. This is kind of a surprise development to us, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The other challenge is the Kahului power plant, which is scheduled to close at the end of 2027. That's when the current air permit expires, and that's a pretty solid date that you can count on, end of 2027. And then there's been a lot of activity on the renewable front in the last several years, but as a result of the pandemic and a lot of challenges related to that, in 2019, 2020, we had 6 projects that were approved to be built on Maui, renewable energy projects, mainly solar. And as we stand here today, there's only 3 left, and only 1 is under construction. These are all scheduled to come online this year and next year. So obviously that's not going to be happening. So Kahului power plant is scheduled to be closed at the end of 2027. That power plant on the waterfront there generates 35 megawatts. It's possible that we will get an extension, possibly 1 year, to keep it open 1 additional year or so, end of 2028, but then that's going to be the end of it. Okay. And so let's talk about Maui for a minute. Last March, so just really a year ago, we were notified by letter from the manufacturer of the Mitsubishi units that we use at Maui. They were no longer going to be able to supply overhaul parts. This kind of came as a shock, surprise, something we weren't expecting out of nowhere. The manufacturer has basically said that the people they count on to make parts to sell for overhauls are not making them anymore. Now these units are all pretty close to 40 years old or above already, but they are 4 units that we count on to provide 50 megawatts of firm generation every day. And what we're estimating, and we have to assume the worst, we have parts to do 1 overhaul right now. So the overhauls are once every 2 years roughly. That depends on how many hours each one of the units is run. We do have some additional parts that we think we're going to be able to get. So it's possible we'll be able to do 1 additional overhaul, but as we move into the end of the decade, it's looking like we were not going to have the parts available to do overhauls after then. So we're kind of assuming the worst. And while we're still hunting around and are still beating the bushes looking for options. We have to start planning and assuming that they're not going to be able to run into the 2030s. So here we are in 2023, and we got to start making some plans about how we're going to replace that 50 megawatts of firm generation. So here's a tally sheet on where we're at on the renewable projects on Maui. And as you can see, I mentioned a minute ago, there's 3 projects that are still in play. The AES Kuiholani Solar, which you can see is under construction, that is still scheduled to be finished by the end of this year. Akaku is kind of a TBD at this point because of some legal challenges and permitting issues with that project. Kamaole Solar just last month withdrew. They said they can no longer stick to the contracted price because of supply chain issues, difficulty in obtaining panels, other equipment, and so they pulled out of that project. And then the last project is one that is our project, Hawaiian Electric battery energy storage project, 40 megawatt project. It is right now in front of the Public Utilities Commission awaiting approval. We think if the approval comes sometime this year, that it can be in service maybe by 2025. So those are the projects we know about right now. We're right now in the midst of a competitive bidding process for more variable renewable projects, utility scale. So we're seeking solar, wind, batteries. We're seeking 40 megawatts of firm renewable, meaning something like the Maui plant, except that it would run on biofuels or something that would be counted as renewable. We're also hoping that people will take advantage of what right now is the program called Battery Bonus, which basically pays you to put in a battery with your solar panels. And we're hoping that we'll get 55 megawatts of new rooftop solar and batteries put in over the next several years. We really want to get all of this online by 2027 because, as you saw from the schedule, we want to make sure that we have new resources ready to go in the event that the Maui units start having to be shut down. As I said, there's a competitive bidding process right now underway. For the renewable variable projects, that will close next week, and so we'll know fairly soon how many projects are bid into that, and we have our fingers crossed that there'll be a lot. This is a project that we are looking at right now. This is what we call our Hawaiian Renewable Energy Center. This is a site that the company has owned since the mid-90s, conveniently located across from the Central Maui landfill. So next time you're out there, take a look. We're right across the street. What we're thinking that we will do is propose small biofuel generators that would go in that site that would, as Kuhei was talking about, provide a backup for renewable resources when they're not available, solar and wind. So it isn't something like the Kahului power plant or even Ma'alaya where it's expected it'll be on all the time. It'll just be on as it's needed. And these are new, fast-starting, flexible fuel units that can ramp up and down depending on what the need is on any given point in the day. With that, also, as I mentioned, our proposed 40 megawatt battery energy storage system that's still before the PUC for approval. And on that site, there's also room for solar, and so we're looking at doing a probably small solar array sometime in the future. Benefits of this project would be that if we can get that backup firm renewable energy on the grid, we can get more renewable energy on as well, because then we'll have that backup. This will enhance our reliability, obviously, because it will help keep the lights on, because we'll have firm generation available as we need it. And it'll also support our decarbonization goals, because these units will run cleaner, they'll run less often, and they will produce less greenhouse gas emissions than existing plants. Hoping to get all of this online by the end of the decade or sooner. Advantages of this site and also the technology, as I mentioned, fewer emissions, less runtime, multi-fuel capable. It's possible these could even potentially run on hydrogen someday if that becomes commercially available. Very low water consumption, small modular units. Site benefits are, unlike our other facilities, it's outside the tsunami inundation zone. It's close to 5 miles away from the closest residential area, and it's already zoned heavy industrial. New projects as part of our, oh, this is you. Come on up, Kuhea. Sorry, I was getting all carried away there.
Great, thanks, Jim. Can you hear me? All right, thanks, Jim. All right, so you, a new component of the Stage 3 RFP is community benefits. And so this would entail a community benefits package that all developers will need to include in their proposal. And we will be doing that in conjunction with stakeholders to understand what the needs in our community are and ask them for their help to develop a process that helps us to develop relevant criteria for dispersing those funds and to make sure that they are spent as they were intended to. Our proposal will focus on benefits that address equity issues and low to moderate income residents. So next steps for now is we want to keep you updated. We would like to have more regular community updates and even community meetings like this. And we're hoping that you're going to help tell us what works for you. How do you like to stay informed? How do you like to receive email? Do you like to be invited to meetings like this? We welcome your input. It's really exciting to have people in this room again. The last time we did that was 3 years ago, March 2020, and I think it was about a week before the world shut down. And so we're very happy to see all of you here and all of you at home as well. Okay, so at this time, I'd like to bring up our folks to help answer your questions. So if Jim will join us here, and we have another Jim Hayes, who is with Planning Solutions, Inc., and also John Murray, who is our Hawaiian Electric Director of Generation. And just as a reminder, you have 3 different ways that you can submit your questions. Even if you're here in the room, you can email your questions to Maui@hawaiianelectric.com. You can text them to 808-268-2808, or you can jot them down if you're here on a comment card. And then Brandon in the back there is going to come around and collect your cards and hand them to us up front. And he can also give you a blank card if you wish. So with that, let me get to my other post there and we'll get started. All right, so our first question is, will the base rate for electricity be based on market oil prices when the overnight rates are increased in 2024? And I'm going to ask Jim Kelly to please that question.
Thank you for that. And just so you know, questions on any topic are welcome. So I think you were talking about the time of use rates, which are about to be rolled out in a pilot program that will start on July 1st. And if you're lucky enough to be selected for the pilot program, getting a note in the mail or an email saying, hey, you just got selected at random to participate in it's called Shift and Save. And it's, any of you are familiar with time of use rates, they use them some places on the mainland. It basically provides an incentive to use more electricity during the day. and then to avoid using electricity during the peak from 5 to 9 p.m. And then at nighttime, it's not as much of a, I guess, disincentive rate at night. But essentially during the day, the rates will be half what they are right now, so about 20 cents a kilowatt hour. So if you can figure out how to use all your electricity between 9 in the morning and 5 p.m., you're going to be ahead. From 5 to 9 p.m., which is the peak, that's when rates are going to go up to around, and these haven't been officially set yet. This is a Public Utilities Commission program that they've established. We're the ones implementing it. The evening peak is going to be around 60 cents. So it's going to be pretty expensive to make that pot of chili that you were really wanting to have when you got home from work. And at 9 o'clock, it goes to the evening rate. And right now, the evening rate is roughly the same rate as the regular residential rate right now. People can opt out of this program if they don't want to be in it. You don't have to be in the pilot. And again, this is a pilot. It's only going to be about 4% of our customers who are going to be in it. We're going to do it for a year. And then the Public Utilities Commission is going to decide, based on the feedback and the data that they collect, how to roll this out to everyone, potentially in 2025. And it's really important. I hope people, if they get picked, will give it a try, see how it works. That's the whole idea, is to try this out for a year as a pilot and see what tweaks might be made to make it work for people. So that's roughly, and within the next 2 weeks, we're going to be doing a lot more communication around this, just so people know that it's coming. People will be getting the notifications probably the end of April, and then the program, the pilot, will start on July 1st. But again, it affects a relatively small number of customers. It's not everybody, so it's going to be at least another 1.5 to 2 years before it rolls out more broadly, if the PUC decides that's what they want to do.
Hey, thanks, Jim. So for those of you in the room, if you would like a blank card, or if you have a computer card, please just raise your hand and Brandon will come around and help you. Okay, so let's to the next question. I think this is also going to be for you, Jim. You mentioned 2 Why Not projects. One was the solar project and the other was the BESS project. Where is the former one located?
Oh, they're all on the same site. It's about 50 acres. So at the front of the site is where we're assuming that if we go ahead with this small firm generation project, it would probably be toward the front. Battery would be someplace kind of in the middle, is that right? And then there's room in the back then for a solar array, if we decide to do that and if that's approved.
Okay. This next question, I'm going to ask John Maury to answer. Which of the renewable sources are most efficient?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you. I mean, I couldn't really tell you between solar and wind which one is more efficient.
Okay. Anybody else care to? Jim Kelly? All right, so this next question for Jim Kelly. Is there more wind
John,
generation?
I was hoping you could take up a little more time with an answer.
Is there more wind generation in our future?
It's hard to say. The RFP calls for every kind of variable technology, so it's conceivable someone could bid in wind. It's technology agnostic, so it is possible that wind could be bid in.
Okay, so this might be a tough question as well, Jim, but which renewable resources are most cost effective?
Most cost effective. It's kind of a matter of timing, and it's a matter of how often it's on. Solar, which a few years ago, before the pandemic, was by far the least expensive utility scale renewable that was on the grid here, Maui or any of the other islands, by far. But since the pandemic and a lot of things in the world have changed, everything is more expensive now. And so solar is more expensive than it was 3 years ago. And I think that's one of the things we have to communicate to people, that while solar is still competitive and while it's still efficient and it's still really the backbone of a lot of our renewable progress, it's not as inexpensive as it was a few years ago. So if people are expecting projects that are going to come in at 9 cents a kilowatt hour, which is what they were, we're not going to be seeing that anymore. And in fact, several projects on Maui and the other islands, the developers who have a contract with Hawaiian Electric to deliver a project at a certain amount that was negotiated back in 2020 have come back and said, we can't do that project anymore for that price. And some of them have taken themselves out and are not going to do the project. Some of them we've gone to the Public Utilities Commission and said, okay, the developer wants a little bit more here to cover their added costs, and sometimes that's been approved by the PUC and sometimes it hasn't. So, I mean, we're in kind of a world that is very different than we were a few years ago. And the results of this latest request for proposals are going to be, I think, very different from what they were a few years ago.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Back to John. What are the plans for Kahului Power Plant after retirement of the generation units? And what are the plans for the retirement of generation units at Ma'alaya Power Plant? And a question of just the Mitsubishi units by 2027.
Yeah, so concerning Kahului Power Plant, again, retirement is presently looked at as 2027. Again, there might be a available extension based on some environmental permits or concerns going on. But after those units are retired, Unit 3 and 4, which are the largest units in Kahului, are going to be converted to what we call synchronous condensers. Yeah, and for those that aren't familiar, synchronous condensers will essentially provide that component of electricity that solar and wind may not be able to provide, that conventional generation does. Yeah. So there's, I'm going to say, several other pieces of electricity that come in that our conventional units provide. When we go to inverter-based generation, it has to be supplemented, mainly voltage support, some fault current, those types of things. So 2 units at Kahului will be converted, and they'll be run as needed depending on what the mix of the grid is. Yeah, essentially it's not a generator anymore. It will be synced to the grid, which means there'll be a component, the generator will be spinning with the grid, but there will be no horsepower put into the system. But we can adjust the voltage on those generators to provide the components that are needed at the time they're needed on the grid. Hopefully that makes sort of sense to you. Other question was Alaya?
Yeah, about Ma'alaya, what are the plans for retirement of generation units at Ma'alaya Power Plant? Is it just the Mitsubishi units?
Yes, so presently the Mitsubishis are being identified as going to be retired units. And again, as Jim mentioned earlier, specifically due to parts concerns. We have contracted parts up until about 2027, 28 right now, assuming the overhauls stay within the scope that we're expecting. We feel we have enough parts to get to that point. However, the situation with the manufacturer is such that we will only find out whether we can get parts or not when we request them. So there's no such thing as these parts are not available. When we request them, they'll come back to us and say we can or cannot furnish the parts. That's a difficulty. So as far as plans goes, those units are being looked at as retiring. The exact date has not been set yet, but again, within the next year or two, we're going to drive in a little harder and probably come up with a date where we feel we can still run the units and maintain them, but after that point, we have to, not rely on them anymore. So those are the main units that come on. The rest of the units are still looked at as being operational. And again, for those situations where, you know, solar or wind, whatever the mix is on the grid is not adequate and maybe batteries haven't been charged where we need them, then those units would be started up to fill in those gaps. Similar to what Hawaiian is being projected for. So strictly as, you know, stop-start type of units, that's the long-term picture for the line.
All right, thanks, John. I want to thank all of you for the questions that are coming in. We have some from the room, but also coming in from over text message and email. So thank you all for the great questions. Maybe we'll have one for you, Jim Hayes. But for now, this one goes back to Jim Kelly. If more commercial and residential solar power is needed, has there been talks of opening back up feed-in tariff and net energy metering or NEM programs?
That's ultimately a decision to be made by the Public Utilities Commission. The battery bonus program that I mentioned earlier was seen as something that, so it's basically you get paid for putting in a battery with your solar, and from that peak period, from I think it's from 6 to 8, you're basically saying I'm going to provide my own electricity or I'm going to feed the grid. So it's a contract between Hawaiian Electric and the owner of the system, and that is seen as a real powerful incentive for people who maybe have been putting off solar, or people who already have solar, either expanding it or putting batteries in with it. But ultimately, the policy decision about net energy metering and any other programs is made by the Public Utilities Commission. I also just want to add something to what John said, because I want to be, I want to make sure people understand when he's talking about 27 or 28 for potentially shutting down the Maui units. The best case scenario for building what is the easiest kind of renewable project, which is a utility scale solar with batteries, is 5 years if everything goes perfectly. So if we started a project today, it would be 2028 before it was up and running, which is part of the reason we're having this discussion tonight. We want to make sure that we're figuring out ways to get some new resources available and get them in the pipeline, get them online, so that when we do reach 27 and 28, and we're talking about closing Kahului and we're turning off the machines at Ma'alaia, that we have the replacement resources lined up. We can't wait until 2025 or 2026 and say, oh boy, we're running short, we better start building some things, because it just doesn't happen like that.
All right, thanks, Jim. I think that just drives home again the point that we are the most isolated place on the planet, and we cannot rely on anyone else or plug in anywhere else to get what we need. So this advanced planning is really key, as well as your input. This next question, I think I want to pass it to John, but I think Jim may also have something to add.
Why don't you warm it up, John?
Okay, this question is, you mentioned encouraging many homes to install batteries. Which would be more cost effective? Thousands of batteries on individual homes, or central large commercial batteries operated by the utility or a third party?
Give me all the tough ones. I think generically speaking, I would probably say utility scale batteries would be more cost effective. And again, I speak from, it's a generic statement, because if everything's in one spot, control-wise, a lot simpler, infrastructure-wise, a lot simpler. If you take that one utility battery, we'll call it, and cut it up into 1,000 pieces, there's 1,000 bits that we have to control and manage. So, like I said, for my mentality, I think, home-sited batteries would probably be a little more expensive for us to operate and maintain.
Yeah.
But again, that's just kind of a generic statement. Just scale generally leads to a little more cost-effective solution, generally.
Jim, anything to add?
No.
All right, you can pass the mic to Jim now. Do you have an estimate of the increase in demand due to EVs, electric vehicles?
All right, I'm going to have to talk about the integrated grid plan, which we just came out with a very lengthy but really interesting report that is the product of years-long engagement and research where we're trying to look at what the demand is going to be over the next 30 years and what we're going to need to meet that demand. I think we are probably on Oahu and Maui and Hawaii Island looking at the demand for electricity probably doubling from what it is today to accommodate not only electric vehicles, but also the electrification of the cranes down at the port. There's potentially aviation, inter-island aviation. I think we're taking a pretty, I don't know, is it liberal or conservative? I think we're assuming it's going to take a lot as we move toward electrification. Now, one of the things that we're really hoping to do and really counting on is the effect that energy conservation and energy efficiency can add to the we talk a lot about generation, but we really don't want to lose sight of energy efficiency, that if people use less electricity, that if our homes and our cars and our businesses become more efficient and we don't have to generate as much electricity, that's going to be great all around. And I think it's, a lot of people think, well, we've already done what can be done with efficiency, and that's really not true. There's still a lot of work to be done in that area, especially in industrial applications. So yes, all of the assumptions that we're making assume a broad electrification of transportation, especially on Oahu, Maui, and Hawaii over the next 30 years.
All right, thanks, Jim. The next question is a really great question. We get asked this a lot, where folks assume that we own all the renewable projects that they see out there, which we do not. So the question is, why doesn't Hawaiian Electric own the renewable projects?
That's a policy decision that the Public Utilities Commission has made, and which we think, frankly, has made a lot of sense over the last 25 years as we've brought in more investment, more capital into the state. I mean, these are projects that big companies elsewhere are financing, and that's a good thing. They're creating jobs. This isn't putting all of the financial risk onto our company, which is a good thing. It's spreading around the different kinds of technology that are offered in for these competitive bids. It's opening it up. It's all about competition. If the utility, which is what happens in a lot of other states, the utility just builds everything. And while that has to go through a regulatory process, by doing these requests for proposals and these competitive bids, the idea is to ensure that you are getting the best price, that everybody's coming to the table with their pencils sharpened, and when they're bidding in with a solar project, wind project, whatever it is, that they're making the best case they can from a financial standpoint, from a technology standpoint, from a community standpoint, which has become very much a big part of evaluating new projects today, as Kuhea touched on. You can have a terrific project at a terrific price today, but if the community isn't involved in it and the community benefits are very appealing, then that project probably isn't going to get selected. So that's kind of a long answer, but that's why we don't build everything.
All right, thanks. I'm going to ask John this next question. What is the source of biofuels that we use?
The biofuels we use today is actually from Pacific Biodiesel. So, wherever they source it, typically I think it's locally. Moving forward, if we go to full-scale biodiesel, it really comes down to the market. If we go to Pacific today for a lot more, I don't know that the supply is there. So they would either source it or we would go out like our other fuels and go out to the market and see who offers the best price.
Okay, thanks. I think you can pass it back to Jim again. Why not include electric vehicles in the battery bonus program?
I think at some point, again, these are not decisions that the utility makes. These are decisions that the Public Utilities Commission makes. But I think it's a matter of technology. At some point, I think we've all read about cars potentially being used as batteries. See, there's a slick Ford Lightning out in the parking lot. I've seen those ads where you can power up your house off of your truck at some point. I don't know if the technology is there yet where it can be used that way, but I know that one of the things we're assuming in the future is that it could be a battery bonus kind of a situation where we would be able to draw power from your vehicle during the peak if it's parked in your garage and it's full, and we can take it out during the peak, and then while you're sleeping we can put it back in, and we'll pay you for that transaction. I think that is going to be something that we will see.
Okay, Jim, this next question pertains to something we were talking about earlier, TOU. How will the time-adjusted rate affect net metering?
We just had we had a lot of questions around that the other day just among our employees, and I think I am going to, I think I'm going to have to take a pass on that because I don't want to answer it incorrectly. People who do have, part of the pilot program is to make sure that everybody who's in it are kind of different kinds of customers, and so there will be people with rooftop solar that are in the program. There's going to be people with EVs in the program, so we want to see how they behave differently when they're on these time of use rates. I think I'm going to have to wait until we put out, because it is complicated. It's basically the question of, okay, during the day when you're producing electricity, are you going to be able to? Are you going to get compensated at the NEM rate, or are you going to get compensated at the lower daytime rate? And I don't know exactly how it works, so I'm going to pass it on. But I can guarantee you that that question and the correct answer will be on the Hawaiian Electric website once we kick off this program.
All right, so this next question I think John does know a lot about, so I'm going to pass it to you. Why not geothermal?
Why not just specifically for Maui? As far as I know, there has not been identified any solid source of geothermal on Maui. Again, I may be wrong. There may be new things coming up, but presently, that's where we're at. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Back to Jim again. When will all Hawaiian Electric customers be required to adopt smart meters?
You don't have to have one if you don't want one. I think that's probably going to be the standard policy of the Public Utilities Commission going forward. I worked on Kauai before I worked at Hawaiian Electric, and we had smart meters back starting in 2013, and that was the policy, that if you don't want one, you don't have to have one. But on Kauai, they also then began charging people a monthly fee to have somebody come out and read your meter. So there is, at least on Kauai, there's a cost associated with that, and I think that's probably something that the PUC would look at here. And I mean, just to be, if the question is related to time of use rates too, I don't know. I mean, I know there's been some people who are concerned about time of use rates because they've heard, I think they've gotten wrong information about it. And I've seen this online where people just said, well, don't get one of those advanced meters and then you won't have to be on time of use rates. the advanced meter is what makes time of use possible. As you can see everyone's use during the day, where the old meter, you basically get a reading at the end of the month and that's it. But ultimately, and I don't think I'm speaking for the PUC here, but people will be able to opt out of the time of use program, but it will not be a rate that is like the regular daytime or regular rate today. I mean, the idea is if they go forward with this program, they really do want people to use these rates. And so just not having an advanced meter is probably not going to mean that you will never have your rate change from what it is today.
Okay, thanks. And there's a second question here. When do you expect that existing programs that have export rates will be adjusted? Example, CGS, currently at $17,000 and cost is at $12.17 per kilowatt hour.
As part of the, so the Public Utilities Commission for the last couple of years has not only been looking at their time of use rates pilot, but they're also in the process of making changes to the existing what we call DER, Distributed Energy Resource programs, which involve rooftop solar. And there is a docket that's open right now on this, and I believe there are some changes that are coming later this year having to do with those programs, whether it's CGS or CGS Plus. And I know that there's work being done on it right now, and that it probably is going to be later this summer. There'll be some more information on that.
Okay, this next question is for John. Has Hawaiian Electric considered replacing Mitsubishi generators with U.S. aircraft carrier and submarine nuclear generators? Both naval vessels are human safe for our sailors. Why not use to provide firm power for Maui County?
Well, I guess the short answer is nuclear generation for the utility side anyway on land is not allowed in Hawaii right now. It's one of the few sources that, by, I guess, state rules, state law, we cannot develop right now. And that does not include subs and the aircraft carriers. They're portable power, if you want to call them.
Thanks. And you can hold on to that mic. Are we in a situation where we may have blackout at times? And if so, if a homeowner has a battery, will Hawaiian Electric take electricity from the homeowner's battery?
So today we're really not in that situation. Like I think Jim was sort of describing, is that, come 2027, worst case scenario, if we don't get what we're looking for through the RFP, if the Mitsubishis, we cannot maintain them, worst case on everything, yeah, that is potentially what can happen. Yeah. But like I said, for today, that's really not the situation, and that's what we're trying to prevent. Part of the, part of the competitive bidding framework that the commission has in place is that we are responsible for grid reliability. And again, part of that framework is we come up with what they call contingency plans. So if the RFP fails in, let's just say, every aspect, we don't get what we're looking for, as a company, we are responsible to come up with a solution. So again, we're watching the RFPs, depending on what comes out of it, what it looks like. We will be in the background looking at what else we need to do to supplement what has been received through the process and come up with a solution so we do not end up in that situation. So that answers the question.
All right. If I could just put Jim Hayes on the spot just for a minute. If you could, just for like 20 seconds, explain the work that you are doing with us, and then we may get some questions for you.
Okay, yeah, people are probably wondering why I'm here. I'm an environmental consultant, planning consultant. I assist Hawaiian Electric with planning and permitting for projects throughout the islands. And the proposal that we've been talking about at Hawaiian is one of those projects. And that project will require certain permits and certain approvals to be acquired before it can move forward. And so if there are questions along those lines, I can try my best to answer.
Okay, thanks, Jim. All right, I think John can take this next one. The Kaheava wind farm was installed almost 20 years ago. What is the plan for that wind farm in the coming decade?
Yeah, so I think Kaeava 1, the contract expires, I believe, 2025, maybe a little off on that. But they are being asked to participate in this RFP, variable renewable energy RFP, to renew their contract or propose, their pricing structure and such. And then they'll be looked at with all the rest of the proposals to see if the pricing is, the lowest, best, and all those criteria. And I suspect moving forward, any existing contracts that we have that are looking for renewal or want to continue operation as they expire will kind of go through that same vetting process to make sure that the pricing is appropriate for what's available at that given time.
Our next question is for Jim Kelly. On Oahu, we already see that the plant in Ewa has been mapped and energy credits of an additional 10% are available for investors. When do you see that the Maui shutdowns will be recorded so that Maui investors can receive the additional 10% credit?
I need some help with that. That's the question. I have a plant, 10% credit.
So on the ARCI guidelines, they show maps of all the areas, and so the shutdown of the Evo plant is already in, so the areas surrounding it are available for an additional 10% energy community credit.
Oh, you're talking about the coal plant?
Exactly.
At Campbell Industrial Park. Okay.
So if these ones are going out and they get registered in the ARCI, then the areas that surround them will also be eligible for the same tax credits.
Okay, well, that would be something that if I were a developer that was looking at that area, and it is an industrial area, we already know that there's one potential developer who's interested in that, that has talked about a proposed project there. So we're assuming that, again, when this RFP that we're talking about, it's for Maui and Oahu and Hawaii Island. And so there will be projects on all three islands that over the next, the bids are due on April 20th, and then sometime over the summer there'll be more information put out on those. And that's for a firm renewable project. That's something that can run on a renewable fuel, which could be biodiesel. It could be like we have on Oahu, the H-Power runs on trash, and it's also for the variable renewable.
I think the question was different from that.
Okay.
The question is, when do you guys plan on certifying with ARCI that their plants will be shut down here on Maui so that the surrounding areas will be eligible for the additional credit? The electric company has to put down that they're shutting down the plants. I know the government has to accept that, update the forms so that the investors are able to get the credit.
Okay, so the question is, when would we be certifying that the plants that we've talked about here, when would they be shutting down?
Exactly.
That is a process that probably wouldn't happen probably for some time, because both with Kahului, where we're looking to see if we can extend the air permits, and then as John pointed out, we're still going to use plant for synchronous condensers, so it isn't like it's going to be bulldozed. And then Ma'alaya is still kind of an open question, so it probably wouldn't be for some time.
Okay, this question is for Jim Kelly. Because of the difficulty having developers honor their RFPs at its price, has HECO considered engineering these systems in-house, ready for permitting, and open up these plans for bid?
I think the question is, why don't we kind of do all the groundwork and then just be able to offer that up to developers so that some of the work has already been done ahead of time. This is a process that is overseen pretty closely by the Public Utilities Commission to make sure that no one has a competitive advantage, including especially the utility. I think that is a potential change in how projects could be done in the future. And just to be clear, this RFP we keep talking about, this is for right now and this year, but I'm just about certain there's going to be another one next year. There's going to be another one after that, up through 2045 and beyond. We're going to be doing these procurements year after year because we're going to have things that retire. We're going to have new technology that emerge that we're going to want to make room for and get them on the grid. So this isn't kind of a one and done sort of a thing. I think this is the third large scale procurement that we've done in the last 4 years, and we're learning new things as we do each one. I think what is being described and asked about is certainly something that could be looked at in the future. If it makes things go faster, if it makes things more efficient, if it makes the prices get cheaper for the customers, I think those are all things that our regulators would take a look at.
Okay, so this question is about unions versus private sector. Why are the union contractors mandatory for these projects when the private sector may be more cost effective?
I don't know that they are mandatory, if the union labor is mandatory. I know that in this most recent RFP, I think you can get extra points if you pay prevailing wage. I'm not sure it has to be union labor.
Okay. Thanks. I think this next question is for John. Are there monies available through the IRA Act or Infrastructure Act to fund needed modifications or improvements at Maui power plant?
I'm not sure that that's a John question. I do not know.
It's a John question.
He says it's a John question. I'm not sure.
But this isn't a problem money can solve certain parts, right?
Yeah, so can you run the question again?
Are there monies available through the Infrastructure Act to fund needed modifications or improvements at Maui power plant?
Yeah, so I guess you're right. If we look at it that way, as far as, we need to find monies to do improvements at Malaya, that's really not the issue or the concern. We are constantly doing changes to Malaya. We've been doing it ever since variable renewable power has been introduced and brought into the grid. Essentially, the first Kayava wind farms that came in, we modified how low our gas turbines can go. We've modified the boilers over there so that they can function, at faster ramp rates, those types of things. If it's concerning the Mitsubishi units, again, it's not truly a financial issue. It's a supply chain type issue. So again, there may be funds available, there may not be, but that's not really a holdback on what we're doing to modify Malaya to accept more variable renewable energy on the grid.
All right, thanks, John. Next question is for Jim Kelly. How can tourists or the tourism industry pay a larger share to fund Maui's future energy needs?
I think that sounds like a John question. Or a other Jim question. I think tourists can do their share by, as I talked about earlier, energy efficiency and being mindful of how much they use while they're here. I don't know that that isn't something that Hawaiian Electric has looked at.
Okay, thank you. This next question, I'll say the question, you can decide who can best answer it. I think we have a mutual agreement with California. Have you been observing them? They have had numerous blackouts. What, if anything, have you learned from their mistakes?
Go ahead.
I don't know if I would call it their mistakes. I think one of the things that comes to mind is, the fires in California. We have looked at that. We have seen issues, and I think those of us on Maui did see, I'm going to say several years ago, there was a fire in the Central Valley. So if you want to take, looking at California and learning lessons, the fires have actually had us take a look at the plants and harden them in a sense. We, make sure that the areas are clear around them. I know there's a lot of work being done with the energy delivery people as far as, the poles, infrastructure, those types of things, and then really looking at, so to speak, hardening them for when their fire comes through so that we don't lose all the poles in those areas. And so, if there's a lesson learned, that's really the one that comes to mind for me.
Okay, thank you. Jim Kelly, how do you expect the inflation-adjusted rates to change in the future with all of the upcoming changes to the generation?
Obviously, the bill impact is something that we look at very closely for all of our projects, and also for the work that we have to do to maintain the system, and ensure that we're still able to keep the lights on. I think when we talk about competition for generation resources, that's got to be on the top of the list. It's how much is this going to add or reduce people's bill by having this resource on the grid. I think we're all disappointed about the last couple of years on how we've seen prices go up and the impact that is having on especially renewable energy projects that reliably, when we put out the news release about a new contract being signed, that everybody's bill would be going down a couple of dollars a month as a result of this coming online. And that's not the situation that we're seeing anymore. But I think, and this is why I want to make sure people pay attention to the information that's going to be coming out on these variable rates, the Shift and Save program. Having people taking more control over how they'll use their electricity and having more knowledge about how they use their electricity can only help them manage their bills better. And I think there's going to be more opportunities for programs, especially for low to moderate income families, either through federal funding or local sources, where we're looking at ways that we can really close the gap between the people who are able to afford rooftop solar and batteries and the people who don't right now. There's a number of programs that I think are right around the corner that are going to be. We have our community-based renewable energy, which allows you to buy a piece of a solar program someplace, and there's just a lot of interest and a lot of attention being paid to how we want to make sure nobody gets left behind in this energy transition. It's really important, and that's why community benefits are also part of these new packages. Projects that are going to be proposed. This is money that is based on how large the project is. It has to be committed to go back into the community for the length of the project, 20 years usually. And it's something that the community has to decide, this is where this money is going to go. And maybe it's going to be used to buy 5 panels of rooftop solar for folks that are, at a certain income level. Maybe it's going to put batteries in people's houses. I think we're right on the cusp right now of seeing ways that we really close the gap between people who have different means, and so everybody can get something out of this transition.
Thanks, Jim. So we have our first question for Jim Hayes. Thank you. This one came in by text message. Is a special use permit required for Waiana? What are the main permitting challenges facing that project?
Yeah, so good question. Thank you. Waiana is an interesting situation because Hawaiian Electric has owned the site for quite a few years and previously proposed to build a larger generating station on that site. And the site was selected after considerable community consultation. Sites were considered all around the island, and that site was selected. And then once the project was proposed, an environmental impact statement was prepared. This is in the mid-1990s. And based on the merits of that analysis, the county and the state changed the zoning of the Waiana site. So the Waiana site has become part of the urban district at the state level, and it is in the industrial district at the county level. And therefore, there's no requirement for a special use permit, which is a permit if the project was still in an agricultural zone, it would need. But that's no longer the case. And then there are permits that will be required, but they're relatively ministerial in nature. So we'd be looking at a covered source air permit. We'd be looking at historical review, grading permits, things of that nature, as well as NPDES permits. There'll be a fuel storage tank, so there'll be a need for a bulk fuel storage tank permit that is issued by the Fire Bureau. So it's those kind of permits that will be required. Now, if this project does move forward, selected through the PUC process, then Hawaiian Electric has committed to do activity above and beyond the requirements to keep the community informed and work through a process with the agencies in the community related to potential impacts, and the community benefit program may feed into that in some manner. So if this project does move forward, you will be hearing more about it, even though certain permits have already been obtained.
Okay, thanks, Jim. And sorry if you answered this already, but does the Waiana project require building permits like the other solar and wind facilities that were built on Maui?
Yes, so there will be building permits required. There'll be grading permits, sort of those standard types of permits. And in some other counties, those are not required because this will be a high voltage installation. But nevertheless, there will be certain building permits, things related to stormwater runoff, things like that that are part and components of building permits.
Thanks, Jim. I just want to take a quick commercial break to say that this address that you see up here, Waiana Maui at hawaiianelectric.com, that is not just for tonight. It is ongoing. We welcome your questions after tonight. And also, this engagement here is really important to us. And we really do want to hear your thoughts about how you want to be kept informed, how often, and do community meetings like this help you? And it's not something we have to answer up here with the panel, but if you want to email us later and let us know. And with that, we'll go to the next question to Jim, Jim Kelly. Are there
just getting warmed up.
Are there any federal tax benefits that would influence the decision-making by Hawaiian Electric in selecting various generation or storage technologies? And there's a second part. What about federal tax advantages or impacts on the various pricing structures?
My understanding, and this is not my area of expertise, is that with all the contracts that I've seen, that previously, that the developers, that basically that rolls into the competitive pricing, that they get some kind of a tax benefit that they're most of them are committing to put that toward the price, the delivered price to Hawaiian Electric. And I think that's a question that the Public Utilities Commission usually asks, and so I believe that is considered as part of what they're. I think a project that gets bid in and they say, well, no, we're going to keep all the tax benefits ourselves, that may be at a competitive disadvantage.
Okay, thanks. Next question is for John. Is the longevity of Ma'alaya tied to the spare parts issue, but also is it being in the tsunami evacuation zone?
The longevity of the Mitsubishi units is definitely tied to a parts issue. The remaining units, I guess it would be somewhat tied to the tsunami zone, but really where we're at right now is the units that we have there, we will continue to maintain as they're needed to support the grid, as time goes on. So again, I think Jim said earlier, there is no real planned retirement specifically to the Malaya generating station because they do appear to continue to serve a function as far as when the resources on the grid may not be available. Again, periods of long duration cloudy weather, limited wind resources, that type of stuff, and then those units would be brought online to fill in those gaps.
Okay, so at the moment I don't have any further questions, but we'll wait a minute or so to see if any more come in. But at this time, I want to thank Akaku, Maui Community Media, for being here. They are with us with every meeting we do to make sure that people can tune in even if they can't be here in person. So we really appreciate the services they offer to this community. Also our panelists, John Maury, Jim Kelly, and Jim Hayes, and also the team helping behind the scenes because we can't do it by ourselves. So thank you very much to everybody and all of you for being here and everyone watching from home. We really appreciate all the questions, really, really good questions. And I appreciate them because I think the questions you're asking, a lot of other people are probably would ask the same questions. So you're here asking it for them. So I really appreciate that. We have one more question coming in. So Sable is back there furiously writing. So if we can take a minute.
But it's for John Marr.
Probably. It's taking some time though, probably.
Yeah, it's probably complicated, so it's for you, John.
Let's just give it to him anyway. Oh, okay. So this is actually for you, Jim. Sorry. Please indicate which community would receive the benefits from the Waina Best solar site.
Oh, that's a great question. So part of the process is, and what's interesting about that project is it's kind of unlike other projects and ones that I'm familiar with on Oahu, where there's within 5 miles of the project, there's communities and neighborhoods and you can pretty well map out who would be most directly affected by the operations of the plant. This plant is, its only neighbor is the landfill, and so it will be ultimately up to the community, and that community is we're going to have to figure that out. We're planning that we would meet with community organizations to talk about, okay, well, where should these benefits, where would they best be used? The good thing about the site is that I think that the benefits can be put to where they're most needed in maybe a community that isn't necessarily right next to the plant. But ultimately, it's up to the community to decide what the needs are, who should be getting this money, how it should be paid out, what it will be used for, what needs it's meeting, and it's a new process for us and for all developers who go through this, and we think it's actually going to be a pretty interesting and exciting process where this is not a Hawaiian Electric decision. This is a decision that will be made by the people in the community, and will help, and will certainly be there at the start to help round up the interested folks who are going to help make those decisions. But ultimately, it's going to be the Maui community is going to decide who's going to benefit from this and how that money is going to be spent.
Thanks, Jim. And just to clarify, the question was about the Waina Best. And so the community benefits wasn't a part of that RFP, but it is for this current one, the stage 3 RFP. So a community benefits package will be a part of any proposal going in for this RFP. And yes, everything that Jim said is
And not just our projects, every project
Right.
that gets bid in, there's gonna have to be a community benefits, there's also a communication component. They have to commit to communicating regularly with the community and meeting with the community. And that's something that's evaluated along with the price and the technology and the location. So we really think that's an important step forward.
all right. So I don't think we have any further questions coming in, but I was just curious, how many of you are joining us for a meeting for the first time? Anybody? All right. And the rest of you have been here with us for other meetings? All right. Well, we appreciate everyone, and we hope that you're going to come back time and time again. And of course, we feed you. So please take some food home with you too. And I would like to give the panel, or at least Jim, he would like to say any final words.
I just want to say, Kuhea, thank you. Great job.
All right. So I guess with that, the questions don't have to end after tonight. Again, please feel free to email us, and we will work with our team to make sure that you get an answer to your questions. And all of this that we are collecting, Dave is sitting next to me, helping with our note taking. Thank you very much, Dave. Very important job. And all of these questions and comments will become part of our application. So that is really important, and that's why we asked you to write your questions down or send them in a way that's written, because we want to make sure that we get the questions just right. Okay, so with that, I want to thank everyone for being here again tonight, and thank you very much.